Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to our webinar this evening on the new Nitrates Action Plan. My name is Richard O'Brien. I'm Regional Manager for Teagasc, Waterford and Kilkenny. I suppose most of you out there know at this stage about the changes and about the new Nitrates Action Plan that was recently announced. I suppose a lot of the big changes mightn't happen for a few years. 2028 is the year when a lot of the change might happen. And I suppose the idea of tonight's webinar is it's planning ahead. What are the plans? What are the actions I need to put in place from tonight's webinar to be ready for 2028? So we have extra slurry storage required, extra soil water required, storage required in 2028. There'll be less nitrogen allowed in 2028. And also we have a milking platform stocking rate reduction and how we distribute the slurry across the whole farm. So, and also we have an increase in buffer zones. So there's many changes, and tonight, really, we're going to talk about the changes across the new Nitrates Action Plan. We have a great panel of speakers. First of all, we'll have Pat Moyle, and Pat's going to just set up his presentation there. Pat is a dairy advisor here in Kilkenny, and Pat has special responsibility then over the environment and irrigation nearly for the last 20 years in the region here. Then Seamus Carney, dairy advisor, and now recently has taken up the role of coordinator of the joint program, Teagasc Tirlawn Joint Program. And finally, we have Thomas Ryan, head of agri-sustainability in Tirlawn. So we have a great panel of speakers. I would ask everybody to use the Q&A function to get questions. We'll have a very open session here. We have short presentations. At the end of every presentation, we'll have a few questions, and then we'll have a panel discussion at the end. So there's a Q&A function at the end, and Mark and myself will go through those questions to the panel at the end, and we'll have a few questions at the end of each speaker. Okay, with that, we'll kick off, and I'll ask Pat first to go through the new slurry and soil water requirements, storage requirements. Okay, thanks, Pat.
Okay, thanks, Richie. So, as Richie O'Brien said there, as part of the 6th Nitrate Action Plan signed in there on the 8th of December, one of the key parts affecting a lot of farmers, in particular dairy farmers, will be the new requirement to have extra slurry and soil water storage in place by the 1st of October of 2028. So really, as you're seeing here on the screen, it really affects this increase in storage affects dairy farmers. So heretofore, for a long time, the figure on the right, on your left there, the 0.33 cubic meters per cow per week has been the slurry storage requirement for a good few decades. This, from October of 2028, is going to increase to 0.4 cubic meters per cow per week. So in this southeast of Ireland, where we are broadcasting from tonight, Zone A, the difference here, you can see that the requirement of 5.28 cubic meters per cow will increase 6.4 cubic meters per cow by the 1st of October of 2028. In old man's language, I suppose, or in day-to-day language, that's an increase of 1,160 gallons up to over 1,400 gallons per cow, and that's for Zone A. So there's no other increase in slurry storage requirement for the other animals on the farm, the weanlings, the cattle over 2, etc. It really is to do with the dairy cow. The second thing that's happening, I suppose, again by October of 2028, is that there will be a requirement to have increased dairy washing storage from the current figure of 0.21 cubic meters per week, which is roughly 30 litres per cow per day, up to the new proposed figure of 0.30 cubic meters per cow per week. And as we'll see later on, by use of a case study, the number of weeks storage that you now require for dairy washings will depend on whether this dairy washings are stored with slurry or on their own. Where have the increases come from? There was a 2-year study carried out on 100 dairy farms using sensors over the last 2 winters, and as a result of that, these are the figures that are actually measured on average over 100 dairy farms over 2 winters. And I suppose the key line figure here, we're getting a message across tonight that these increased storage requirements are going in place from the 1st of October 2028. But as we'll see later in the presentation, this date is not that far away in reality. So for way of explanation and for clarity tonight, I'm going to look here at a farmyard here, drawing of a farmyard here, where you see a typical, set up. You see a milking parlour and a dairy. You see a cubicle house, a feed passage here, and you see just one slatted tank shown here, but this cubicle house here contains more tanks. I suppose what we're looking at this dairy farm here is what will be the slurry storage requirement going forward for the stock on the farm, but also what will be the increased requirement for dairy washings. So one thing I suppose you'll see about this farmyard already is that the dairy washings here on this yard, along with the water from the collection yard here, all is collected here in the slatted tank agitation point. So on this farm here, as we'll see, there's a greater requirement to store dairy washings because it's stored with slurry. And once dairy washings is stored with slurry, it is classed as slurry. So that's just a farmyard. We'll come back to that in a moment. So first of all, we'll look at the current slurry storage requirements for this farm. It's a 135 dairy herd, and typical of, I suppose, a lot of Kilkenny, just the replacement stock only are kept over the first and second winter. So you see here 30 heifers 1 to 2 and 30 heifers 0 to 1. There's no cattle over 2 on the farm. This is the current figure, the 0.33 weeks, and it's multiplied by the 16 weeks for zone A. So top of the right here, 910 cubic meters is currently the slurry storage requirement for this farm, this dairy farm. The only figure that's changing, as we'll see here, is the requirements to have more slurry storage for the dairy cows. So straight away here, we can see the increase from 0.3 to 0.4, and you see there the increase of extra slurry storage required, where it's coming from, just highlighting the key figures there. So we've gone up from 910 cubic meters up to now 1,061 cubic meters because of the increased requirement for dairy cows going forward. This is an increase of 151 cubic meters, which in imperial gallons is around 33,000 gallons. And just to give you as listeners an idea of what size tank that would be on its own, it's roughly a 63-foot tank, 4 standard spans. It's a 12-foot 6, 3.51 meter tank, and it's a standard 8-foot deep. That's an approximate length and width and depth of a tank to control or contain the extra slurry storage. Again, the main point here, it's really affecting dairy farmers, and the increase is attributed to dairy cow storage over the winter period. So moving on then to the soil water situation, we've seen from the drawing heretofore that there's 2 sources of soil water. We have the collection yard area, which is fairly substantial, 38.4 meters long by 4.27 meters wide. And we'll come back on the 10 weeks in a moment here. We also have the dairy washings, 135 cows by the current regulation of 0.21 cubic meters per week by the same 10 weeks. So you might ask, where's that 10 weeks coming from? And it's coming from the fact that on this farm, as we showed earlier, the soil water and dairy washings are stored with slurry, and soil water and dairy washings stored with slurry are classed as slurry. So that means this farmer has to store these liquids from the 1st of October, which is the start of the close period. And as I'm saying here, he roughly dries off around the 1st, 2nd week of December. So he is faced with storing 10 weeks dairy washings along with 10 weeks of actual soil water in the yard when the collection yard is being used at milking time. So the new requirements then at the bottom of the page are going to be, you see the increased figure here. It's 135 cows. And I suppose you might ask the question, where does the cow number come from? Well, in the legislation, there's 4 choices of what cow numbers we need used in calculation, but it's whichever month figures are the highest. So for most dairy farms that are spring calving in the country, it's number of cows milked over a 15 or a 10-day period in October. So for most farmers, that will be the total number of cows on their farm. And that's what's used to generate the figure of number of stock by the new figure, 0.3 cubic meters per week by 10 weeks. So again, you can see a steady increase here as I'm highlighting the figures here. We've gone up from 321 cubic meters up to 443 cubic meters. And again, a cubic meter is approximately 220 imperial gallons. And you can see that there, that has led to an increase of 122 cubic meters, which is 26,840 gallons. And again, we're putting in the reminder about these requirements are required from the 1st of October 2028. So in summary for this farm, the increased slurry storage, as we've seen, is 151 cubic meters. The increased dairy washings and soil water is 122. So that's given us a requirement to provide an extra 273 cubic meters at a minimum, or 60,000 gallons by the 1st of October of 2028 on this farm, assuming, of course, that there is adequate existing storage on farm. So what are the options for this farm? Well, we're putting up three here tonight. One, obviously, is to go ahead and construct tanks. And I've just to give an example there of two tanks, which are roughly 70 foot long by 12 foot 6 flat by 8 foot deep. And I come up with two tanks here to make up the storage. And again, this is net storage. That means net storage after freeboard. So in a covered tank, even though it's 8 foot deep or 2.44 meters, in the net calculation, we knock off 0.2 of a meter for extraneous water and freeboard. And if that was an uncovered tank, we'd be knocking off 0.7 of a meter in the net calculation. So that's just one option. Option B is to construct an overground slurry store, as we see a lot of farms around the country. And option C then is to maybe look at the option of reducing dairy washing storage by constructing a separate tank. So on this farm, soil water and dairy washing are stored as slurry. So he has to have enough capacity for the length of period that he's milking from the 1st of October to dry off. If it was a separate tank, you're down to maybe 31 days storage, which is 4.4 weeks. And that's what I suppose the last point explains there. We'll come back to that as an example. So standalone dairy washings is 31 days, 4.4 weeks. And if you're stored with slurry, it's down to the length of time you milk from the 1st of October to dry off. I suppose the next thing that's in the headlines, and just to explain it briefly and talk about it very briefly, planning permission exemptions. What are they and how do they apply to our case study farmer? So the first one that comes up here, there is a planning permission now in place, an exemption I should say, where you can construct standalone slurry storage to a maximum of 1,000 cubic meters in its own right, which is around 220,000 gallons. But there's an overall maximum then, or aggregate area, or capacity, say, of that total area or total storage existing plus proposed to a max of 1,500 cubic meters. So I'll explain that a bit better when we look at the farmer in the case study. Option two here for planning permission exemption, that if you now build a cubicle house or an animal house that's less than 300 meters, it is exempt from planning, provided that the area of that shed and any existing sheds used for animal housing are less than 450 square meters. And for a lot of dairy farmers tuned in tonight, when you go around their existing animal housing sheds, you will be well over the 450 meter threshold straight away. So that may not apply in a lot of cases. And third point to make here is that people are going through the TAMS process, etc., to apply for TAMS grant aid on these structures. You have to have a Section 5 exemption letter has to be uploaded at the time you're applying for the council to actually avail of this planning permission exemption. If you have to go for planning permission, you have to go and get it first, and it's only when you've acquired the planning permission can you actually make the TAMS application. So we are waiting maybe the final details from the Department of Agriculture, and I know there's ongoing meetings as we speak around the country in the different county councils to ensure how this planning permission exemption will actually happen in reality. If we go back to our case study farmyard for a moment before we tie things up, I suppose the first point here is, do planning permission exemptions apply in this case? So the first thing we give the farmer an option of is that he could actually build a standalone slurry storage, whether that be an overground steel tank or an underground concrete tank that's fenced off. So that's what standalone storage means. It does not mean a tank with a roof over it. So as we see here, the overall threshold is 1,500 cubic meters. This farmer, following a visit by myself there lately, he has 818 cubic meters of existing storage. So when we take that from the overall threshold allowed, he could construct standalone slurry storage to a maximum size of 682 cubic meters. So he can avail of the planning permission exemption if that's the route he decides to go. But if the farmer wants to provide extra roof area and extra cubicles, we're looking at option B. So he wants to build a new cubicle house, for example. So straight away, you can see here from my drawing, I've measured all these sheds here. The existing sheds for animals used for housing is over 1,000 square meters. The new shed that's proposed to cover those tanks that we spoke about earlier is 316 square meters. So in both cases here, he has to apply for planning permission. Why? Because his existing sheds are already over the 450 square meters exemption aggregate area, and the new shed is already over 300. So both things are applying here. So in this case here, if this farmer wants to construct a new cubicle house, well, then he must apply for planning permission. I suppose just finally to wrap up, we spoke a lot about where these regulations are in place and must be in place by the 1st of October of 2028, which sounds a long ways away. So I suppose if we just look at this table for a moment here, and as any of you will know that are on tonight, if you decide to build a shed or anything, it will not happen overnight. And I'm just putting 4 parts, 4 phases to any planned development. The first one here is it's to conduct an audit of the farmyard, and that can be carried out by your local Teagasc advisor to assess requirements. Part two then is obviously to decide on are you going to be exempt or not from planning permission, and if not, you must prepare and receive planning permission, which is a minimum of 3 months if everything goes in your favour. And it could be 6 months and it could be 9 months, and depends on what happens. There could be further requests for information. That's before anyone maybe makes an appeal on the council's decision. So I'm just giving an approximate timeline here, anywhere between 3 and 6 months. Having received planning permission, then you're waiting to apply in the next TAMS tranche. And again, you must receive approval from the Department of Agriculture before you start any building construction work. And that can be anywhere from 3 up to 9 months. And maybe in some cases, I've heard of cases, things got delayed up to 12 months for whatever reasons. Maybe there was a change in the design, etc. And then all this time, of course, you're trying to line up a builder, gather estimates, get your finances in order, have loan organised, whatever it may be. And that could be a further 3 to 9 months. So maybe some of this can run concurrently, but I suppose all I'm trying to show you here is that the total time here for any project here could be a minimum of 9 months up to 18 months plus. And if you do a simple calculation back from the 1st of October of 2028, and we work back 18 months from the 1st of October 28, that's telling you that you need to have a lot of your homework done, if not all of it, by the 1st of April of next year. So while this 1st of October 2028 sounds a long way away, the requirement under the Nitrate Action Plan is to have that storage in place from the 1st of October. And I suppose the main message is to act now. So look, in conclusion, that's what's happening as part of the 6th Nitrate Action Plan, mainly affecting dairy farmers in the 2 areas of slurry storage and soil water. So thank you for your time, and we will be taking questions in due course. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pat. And while Seamus is getting his presentation up, sharing his presentation, there's questions coming in, and just to say to the audience there's a Q&A function at the end of your screen, and just any questions, put them in, and we will have a panel discussion at the end. So just one question, Pat, and I suppose that exemption from planning, maybe, explain further the process to achieve the cert of exemption for building works from the local county council for TAMS purposes. Maybe just elaborate on that. That's one of the questions.
Yeah, so currently to apply for a planning permission exemption, you have to apply to your local county council. And I just did some research on Kilkenny County Council. And to apply, you have to apply with an application form, which is available on their website. There is a planning fee of €80, but you must also supply a site location map showing where the farm is located. You have to show or submit a farmyard layout plan on a scale of 1:500, showing all existing structures and the proposed structure. And they're also looking for detailed drawings of the shed, whether it be a scale of 1:50, 1:100, or 1:200. And on their website, it says that a decision on exemption is made within 4 weeks of application. So in reality, Richie, I suppose it's like a mini planning application. So you will have to engage a draftsman or technician to do these drawings to apply for a planning permission exemption. And being successful on that application, you'll be issued with a standard Section 5 planning exemption letter on headed paper from the council, and that has to be uploaded at the time of TAMS application to satisfy the department that yes, you are rightfully availing of the new planning permission exemption.
I suppose the biggest advantage will be it's quicker than the planning process.
Obviously, but I said that's what's on the Kilkenny Council website. It says a decision within 4 weeks, but again, I'm sure that people do not put in or good quality drawings, etc. As I mentioned there, obviously they could come back looking for further information. So as I said, we're here locally in Kilkenny and Waterford that there are meetings going on in the councils who are looking at how this whole planning permission exemption will work.
Okay, we'll come back on. There's other questions coming through there. We'll come back on that. So I'll hand over to Seamus there. Okay.
So look, I suppose just to follow on from Pat, Pat really went into the slurry storage there, which is the big one facing farmers very quickly. You can see the screen there now. So I suppose the first big change coming in 2026, so we break them into changes for 26, 27, and 28. I suppose the good news is that we now have the derogation up to 2028. So we know we have it for 3 years at this stage. But there's a lot more farms now in the country that are now capped at 220 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare. And we're going to go through the map to show where. The other big change for 2026 is that all farmers in derogation will have to identify their milking platform on their single farm payment or their BIS application. There's also a requirement to move some of the slurry from the milking block on more heavily stocked farms to the outblocks of land. There's also a requirement to accelerate lime spreading on farms in derogation. For 2027, the department will be looking for a nitrogen balance from each of these farms from AgNav. And that AgNav is a program in conjunction with Teagasc, Bord Bia, and ICBF, where as the farmers' figures are being collected at the Bord Bia inspection, all the information needed to get the nutrient balance will be put into the AgNav program, and it'll give out a nitrogen balance. So it won't be too onerous on farmers. The next one then is after that, 1 second now, so we'll page down. So in 2028, and as Pat said already, there's the requirement for extra slurry storage and extra soil water. And in certain river catchment areas then as well, there's a further chemical reduction for chemical nitrogen by 5%. And the river catchments we're talking about, a lot of the area here in the southeast, the Slaney, the Barrow, the Nore, and the Blackwater in Munster then as well. And the other change then as well is there's an increase in buffer zones for slurry and chemical fertilizer, which we'll go through as well as the chemical nitrogen now in the next couple of minutes. So basically, I suppose the first one here is the map of the changes for what farmers can stock their farms at. So look, we've taken the southern half of the country. So as everyone that's in derogation that was in the purple area, they were limited to an organic nitrogen loading on their farms of below 220 for the last couple of years. And what's after happening now this year, since the 1st of December 2025, all these areas here in yellow throughout the country, they've now been brought in to this upper requirement of no more than 220 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare of a loading. So if I take my own county here in County Waterford, there was only about a third of the county limited to 220. Huge amount of the county now, probably about over 2/3. There's a few sections of the country all the time in white. They're still allowed to go up to 250 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare. And this map is available on the Department of Agriculture website if you need to sort out what limit your own farm is limited to. The milking platform then is basically any land that's within 3 kilometres of the milking parlour. It's accessible for grazing by dairy cows and accessible at any stage during the year. So it might be putting cows off there to take them off the milking block at certain times of the year to put them to somebody outground that might be 2 kilometres away. That could be part of your milking block. There's a requirement to declare the milking block each year on the BIS payment, and all the cows in the farm then, so peak cows, are used to determine the stocking rate on the milking block. So the example I have here is 100 cows on the farm, there's 40 hectares on the milking block. That farm is stocked at 2.5 cows per hectare. And that has a knock-on effect then of the requirement to move slurry from the milking block. And this whole moving slurry, in reality, is happening in a lot of cases where the slurry has been brought back out to land outside of the milking block, normally where the silage is taken in a lot of cases. That type of ground could be getting 2,500, 3,000 gallons of slurry. So a lot of the nutrients move from the milking block out to the outblocks. And really it's about limiting the total amount of nitrogen, both organic in the form of cows plus chemical in what you spread with the tractor and spreader. We're trying to limit, the department are trying to limit that loading to less than 500 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And I suppose to find out how much slurry you need to move from your own land on the milking block, the first thing you have to do is work out your stocking rate and how much chemical fertilizer you're allowed. So I suppose now we're looking at derogation really applies in the vast majority of farmers from a stocking rate of 170 now to 220. But there's two different rates of fertilizer depending on whether you're under or over 210 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare. So if we look at farmers stocked at 170 to 210 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare, so that's 1.85 to about 2.3 cows per hectare, those farmers currently are allowed 241 kilos of chemical nitrogen per hectare. And that's taking a cow at 92 kilos of organic nitrogen. But once you go over this limit here of 210 organic nitrogen per hectare, then your fertilizer reduces by almost 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So you're losing about 27 kilos nitrogen per hectare pretty much around the fertilizer. So in some cases for farmers, maybe at 211, 212, 213, they might actually be better off here to drop just below the 210 mark if they're struggling with their fertilizer allowances to get a little bit more fertilizer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use this farmer here that's actually allowed 241 kilos of nitrogen per hectare on their overall farm. So this farmer is stocked between 170 and 210 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare. They're spreading 241 kilos of chemical nitrogen per hectare. So really what it means then is with this 92 kilos of organic nitrogen cow, once you go over 2.8 cows per hectare on a milking block, you have to start moving slurry. So if you're under 2.8 cows per hectare on a milking block, there's no requirement to move slurry. Once you go over 2.8, between 2.8 and 3 cows per hectare, you need to move just over 8 cubic meters per hectare, or that works out at moving 750 gallons for every acre in the milking block. So if your milking block's 100 acres, you need to move 75,000 gallons in practice and on paper to the outside block. And in some cases, there's actually probably more than this being moved to the outside blocks anyway. Once we head for 3 to 3.25 cows per hectare, we're up at a rate then of over 16 cubic meters per hectare or over 1,500 gallons per acre. So again, on our 100 cow operation here, that would mean then we have to move 150,000 gallons from the milking block. And once we hit the higher stocking rates, then over 3.25 cows per hectare, we have to move more than 1,500 gallons per acre. Now, the thing is, once we have a higher stocking rate where we're allowed less fertilizer, these limits here are slightly higher before you have to start moving slurry. But anyone under 2.8 cows per hectare, and it's just the cows, the heifers not included in this stocking rate, milking platform stocking rate. So it's the cows divided by the hectares in the milking block. Once you're under 2.8, there is no requirement then to move slurry from the milking block. Now, in the case study Pat was using there, that farmer is stocked at about 2 cows per hectare on the milking block. So in that scenario, there is no requirement to move slurry. And I suppose the fourth thing, and I suppose, look, anyone in derogation at the minute has a fertilizer plan. There's a requirement to spread up to about a quarter of your fertilizer each year. But in the new nitrate action plan, there's a requirement now that any land that is requiring up to 5 tons per hectare needs to have that requirement spread within the first 2 years after the date of the soil samples. So even any samples being taken this spring, basically any land with less than 5 tons per hectare requirement needs to have the lime out in 26 and 27. Where there's more than a requirement of 5 tons per hectare, you need to spread up to 5 tons per hectare within the first 2 years. So essentially all land that needs lime up to 5 tons per hectare needs to be sprayed in 26 and 27. So that's about 2 tons, up to 2 tons per acre needs to be put out in 2026 and 27. And I suppose the one thing with that is, again, this is Pat's case study farm. The big advantage with the lime is it will actually help grow more grass or to keep farming at the stocking rate you're at with the reduced chemical nitrogen allowances that we're allowed at the minute. Because in this scenario here, we look at the soil samples for this farmer, a third of the farm was lacking in 2020. When the new soil samples were taken in 2024, about 13% of the farm still needed fertilizer application. But if we look at this figure here, it tells us the proportion of grass extra we could grow by getting the lime right. So there's about 6% more growth potential there by getting the lime right on this section of the farm. And that is very important when we're faced with reduced chemical nitrogen rates going forward. And just bear in mind, in the last 8 to 10 years, the allowances for chemical fertilizer on the irrigation farms has already reduced by over 20%. And these are the current rates at the minute. So if you're stocked at the 170 to 210, you're allowed 241 kilos of organic nitrogen, of chemical nitrogen per hectare. And once you go over 210 organic nitrogen stocking rate, you're only allowed 214 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And for anyone farming in the catchments of the Barrow, the Slaney, the Nore, and the Blackwater in Munster, there's a further 5% reduction baked in 2028. So farmers in the Barrow, Slaney, the Nore, and the Blackwater in 2028, those stocked at between 170 and 210 would have to survive at 229 kilos of nitrogen, and those stocked over 210 would have to survive at 203 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. That's 160 units per acre. And I suppose the one thing, if we're going to have to survive at these stocking rates, fertilizer allowances at these stocking rates, the lime, the P, and the K. And the K is a big element that's underestimated in most farms. There's no restriction how much you can put out. But in general, when we look at soil samples, the element that's lacking most on farms that have nutrient management plans done for them is actually the K element, or the potassium element on the farms. And I suppose finally, then, the other addition as well in 2028 is the buffer zones where you don't spread your chemical fertilizer or your organic slurry are being increased. So today here in the southeast is the first day where farmers are allowed to spread slurry. And essentially at the minute, when you go to spread slurry, you need to keep the slurry 10 meters away from any open water courses or any drains. So basically for the month of January, no slurry to be spread within 10 meters of any open watercourse. It's 5 meters for the remainder of the year. But come 2028, the 5 meters for the remainder of the year is being increased to 8 meters. So a lot of the low emission slurry spreading systems are 7.5 meter widths. It's the full width of the actual low emission slurry spreading machine at the back of the tanker not to spread any slurry within that distance of any open watercourse. And where there is a slope of greater than 20% on your land in 2028, you actually need to keep back 20 meters in that case. And in relation to chemical fertilizer, we can't spread chemical fertilizer in our own region here until essentially the 1st of February this year. And when we go to spread chemical fertilizer, we have to allow for 3 meter buffer zones. And in 2028, that's been increased to 4 meters buffer zone. Again, it's about improving and maintaining water quality. So I suppose the changes then really we're looking at is for 2026, a lot more farms coming in at the overall stocking rate, the limit of 220 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare. Farmers will have to identify their milking platform and their single farm payment. We'll have to move more of the slurry from the milking platforms to the outblock of land. There is accelerated lime requirement. And I'd also advise farmers to look at their potassium, their K requirement as well. And we also, as Pat said, really need to start the whole process about extra slurry and soil water storage. And it's ironic that in March 2006, the whole farm waste management was launched, and it was closed at the back end of 2008. So 20 years later, it's replicating a lot of the slurry storage was put in place on farms throughout the country. So I think that's me, Richie. If there's any questions that want to be asked at that stage, or we can hand over then to Thomas to go through his bit then after that.
Okay, while Thomas is sharing his presentation, there's a few questions coming in. There's a couple of questions on the nitrogen balance, Seamus. I think there's a bit of confusion on that. There's two questions where people, what is that nitrogen? Can you explain that nitrogen balance, and does that have to be done this year, or when does that have to be done?
Yeah, look, the good news is it's 2027 before it has to be done. So how the nitrogen balance is worked out, it's all the nitrogen coming onto the farm. It's true what meal is coming in, what chemical fertilizer, and the stocking rate of the cows then on the farm. It then takes the off takes in the form of milk or meat or grass being grazed. It's also the nitrogen coming from slurry. And that's all put into an overall calculation. And the less fertilizer putting out, the better the nitrogen balance will be on most farms. But the good news is that farmers on the call here are doing their Board B inspection. The information is already collected. They can sign up into the Signpost Advisory Program. It's a free program. And that can actually help then generate a nutrient balance. So a lot of the hard work will be done. It's having the overall fertilizer spread on the farm, having that right on it is the big issue. But all the information is up on the fertilizer register at this stage.
And
So
what
it's
is the
2027.
target? What is it? There's a
Yeah, so
target, that figure, Seamus.
so the target, a good nitrogen balance will be about 150 of a figure, and that really equates to the natural nitrogen being released from the ground itself. So really then what comes in the form of slurry and chemical nitrogen is being used in the products coming off the farm. So a balance of about 150 is kind of the background nitrogen coming from the soils itself.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to, there's lots of questions coming and we'll take them at the very end. So, Thomas, I think you're ready to kick off there. And
yeah, I am Richie, and you can
Yeah.
hear me clearly. Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, well, look, thanks very much to everyone who joined, and indeed to yourself for the invitation to join the webinar. So look, I've been asked really to give everyone maybe a break from the detail of the measures in the Nitrates action plan and the new measures that come in, and maybe talk for a minute around the Farming for Water EIP. It was launched at the back end of 2024, and indeed, look, for the full calendar year, it was fully operational during the calendar year of 2025. So look, what is it? It's effectively a program which is a joint program run by the local authority water program called LawPro, Dairy Industry Ireland, and Teagasc. And in summary, it's a 60 million project focused on a number of measures such as water quality improvement, climate change mitigation, and biodiversity protection. Indeed, look, playing a significant part in terms of the overall successful campaign, in terms of the decision that was made this week, last month, so on the 9th of December, with the renewal of the nitrates derogation, which Pat and Seamus have said, we have now in place for 3 years. The farmers participating in the Farming for Water EIP, this was a significant element when Commissioner Jessica Rosswell came to Ireland in November in advance of the vote. She met with a number of farmers, including our suppliers in Kilcullen, Pat Durkin and his daughter Kaylee, and they went through their Farming for Water EIP application and actions, and it played its part in terms of supporting the case for renewal of the derogation. So maybe look, how does it work? So there's 43 measures within the Farming for Water EIP, and funding is provided for measures such as sediment traps, riparian areas, farmyard bucket and brush. And in terms of, we'll go into greater focus in a few minutes around the exact funding levels that are available. But for putting in place a rainwater management plan and completing this end surplus consultation, or the end balance that yourself, Chairman, and Seamus were just talking about, there's €500 available for that. And what is a rainwater management plan? Effectively, it's a detailed evaluation of the farm designed to map water flows across both the farmyard and the surrounding lands. And then look, arising out of that, there's an action plan put in place. And for that plan being put in place and completing training, there's €156 available. There's further EIP measures would be identified arising out of the farm visit. And really, it's about having the right measures in the right place with the funding provided. And look, a very basic question around who's eligible, to participate in this 60 million program. Well, the EIP is open to farmers with land in priority catchments where targeted water quality improvements are needed. Importantly, though, we have to be clear, the applications for funding must be made by an ASSAP advisor. So in the case of us here in Tyrone, we have a dedicated team of agri-sustainability advisors that are available to put in the EIP application, as indeed there's a team of Teagasc advisors who are also working very closely with tillage and livestock farms. But between ourselves, between Teagasc and Tyrone, look, we're here to help in terms of getting in EIP applications. So you can see there on the left-hand side, our catchment, and unfortunately, or depending unfortunately, the pink area there is the shaded area which are in these priority catchments. So for all intents and purposes, the majority of the Tier catchment area is farmers in these areas are eligible to have farming for water EIP application submitted. This is a busy slide, and it's one of three in terms of some of the measures that are funded and indeed the rates that are available. And maybe if we look just at two, so within the top five, as a co-op now, as we came to the end of December 2025, we had €6 million worth of farming for water EIP applications submitted on behalf of our farm family suppliers. And two of the top five measures was measure number 2 there, the farmer training course, and measure number 4 there, having a nitrogen surplus in place. So having that going on to AgNav, getting your end balance number that you just spoke about, there's an annual payment of €250 for that for 4 years, just by simply going on to AgNav and drawing down and pulling down that end balance number. And look, we now know that from 2027, that's going to be a requirement for farms in derogation. But imagine, look, there's funding also available. Look, on this one here, here's some of the other 43 measures that are available. You see things like buffer zones, tree planting. I'm looking there at measure 17. Tree planting, and then maybe the last slide of EIP measures is looking at the final measures of the 43. Look at number 35. There's an interesting one. Solar pumps. Alternative water supply solar pump. There's funding available there of €2,500 per unit available there for a maximum of 2 units. And again, noting within our top 5 measures being applied for, by our co-op members, bovine exclusion from water bodies, which effectively is fencing, at a payment rate of €2.77 per metre. Then down the bottom, the farmyard bucket and brush, there's a maximum funding there of up to €2,000 or 50% of the cost up to that maximum of €2,000. And then look, indeed, slurry testing, there's a payment there of €70 per farmer, which is really important in the context of what Seamus has said was around the challenge that's going to be here around chemical nitrogen or around chemical fertilizer use. The importance of understanding the nutrient value of our core assets sitting in the farmyard, within our slurry tanks, getting that tested, understanding the NP and K values, and then tailoring your chemical allowances on the back of it. Look, in terms of maybe a worked out and worked through example, and I'm covering off 2 of these. So the first one here, we're just looking at a typical farm here, where the rainwater management plan sets out, look where the effluent gullies are, where the clean water gullies are. This is what you can expect. So when your Tier Agri Sustainability Advisor or your Teagasc ASSEP Advisor comes out and completes a rainwater management plan, they'll effectively give you that overview of water flows as it relates to your farmyard and indeed your overall holding. For that being put in place, we're saying there's a value of €250 to you for having that rainwater management plan. Having your nitrogen surplus figure, going on to AgNav and putting it down, getting your 250 over 4 years, that's €1,000. Getting your slurry analysed, that's €280. Participating in a farmer training course, that's €156, and purchasing a farmyard bucket and brush. So here is just shy of €4,000, so €3,686 of funding that's available for you to take measures, many of which, look, you might perhaps be considering doing, but this funding that's available might be that nudge, to take the actions maybe that are required and you were thinking of. Looking maybe at one more example here, you'll see the rainwater management plan. It's outlining where the river is. That you can see the River Nore is flowing. That blue line flowing along to the right of the farmyard. It's noting there at the top. You see a steep slope, just noting the contours of the flow into the farmyard. And effectively, it's demonstrating and look, just highlighting where perhaps the risks around runoff and nutrient management are required. On this farm, my colleagues put in an application on this farm for an overall combined value of just over €6,000, €6,275. So that once again was made up of a combination of €250 for the rainwater management plan, the same as the last one. The 4 nitrogen balance, going on to Agnav and putting down the nitrogen balance, so that came to €1,000. Getting the basics right by analysing the slurry, €280. Participating in a farmer training course, €156. Putting in place water bars to €639. A willow bed, €1,750. Getting a contractor to help around the willow bed, there was 200 available for that. And again, a measure proving very popular at farmyard, bucket and brush, at €2,000. So again, look, these are all practical actions that we could all see ourselves doing. And here's €6,275 coming onto this farm that'll make a difference. And indeed, is going to be that farmer playing their part in terms of giving ourselves a fighting chance as we head from 2028 into 2029. And we're making the strongest case possible again for renewal of the derogation. My second last slide here is just saying, look, as many of your viewers will know, in Tirlawn, we have our Sustainability Action Payment Programme. It's ½ a litre, which is the equivalent, which is worth on average about €3,000 to a farm family supplier. By participating in the Farming for Water EIP and taking measures such as planting your native trees and hedging, having your nutrient management plan in place, having a Farming for Water EIP, fencing off water courses, and indeed going on to Agnav and having your farm nitrogen balance, you're ticking there 5 of the 7 measures required. So look, there's almost this double dividend. By participating in the Farming for Water EIP, you're almost there in terms of meeting the requirements of the Sustainability Action Payment, which is that ½ cent. I might just give a final call out by saying, look, in terms of suppliers declaring their actions to continue to receive the ½ cent a litre in 2026, the portal on Tirlawn Farm Life closes on the 30th of January. So look, there's about 2 odd weeks left. So look, a call out will be, please go on, declare your actions and lock in that ½ cent. It'll be important not to leave that €3,000 behind you. Final slide says, look, as Tirlawn, as a member-owned co-op, we're here to help. I'm lucky. I've got a really good team of capable and knowledgeable colleagues, with Sarah O'Sullivan, Matthew Moylan and Owen Cahill all working in the Nore area, Michael Hassett working in the Blackwater and the Shore, Conor Kelly working in the Barrow, the Blackwater and the Shore, Sean Martin working in the Boyne, Ciara Doyle in the Slaney, and Hugh Harney in the Barrow. These are my colleagues that are every day working hand in glove with our farm family suppliers, putting in place the necessary actions to give us that fighting chance to continue the good work as we seek to retain the derogation of 2028 onwards. So look, thank you very much for the opportunity maybe to just bring to life the Farming for Water EIP.
Perfect. Thomas, thank you very much for that. And I'd ask all the speakers now, maybe they'd put on their cameras and come back in. And while they're doing that, Thomas, just there's a few questions coming in on the EIP. Is it still open? Is the first question. Is it still open, and is it available to all farmers?
Yeah. So 2 good, very clear questions. Yes, it is still open. So the overall budget is 60 million. That's a national pot. As a co-op, we were saying, look, we have 6 million applied for, and we have greater ambition in 2026 to go beyond that. Even look, Teagasc have done Trojan work in the southeast, particularly in the Wexford area, and working with tillage farmers in terms of getting catch crops in. The mosaic of work that's happening across all enterprises, not just dairy, is really impressive. So yes, it's open. Get on to either your Teagasc ASSIP advisor or your Tirlawn Agri Sustainability person, and we stand ready to help, Richie.
Yeah, and the question, how is it's submitted? I presume, yeah, okay, the personnel are there in Tirlawn and in Teagasc, but it's online. Is it application?
It is, and sorry, you asked the other question: is it available to all farmers? By and large, yes, so long as you're in that what they call a priority area for action. So the majority of farmers, the answer is yes. However, whether, look, your ASSEP advisor in Teagasc or your agri-sustainability advisor in Tirlone will be able to guide you on that. And the responsibility or the obligation, look, around submitting the application is done on your behalf by your advisor. So look, connect in. We're here to help.
Okay, no, that's perfect. And Mark is going to give me a hand on the questions, and I'll just go to Seamus next. There's a question there for Seamus. Why is there more area included now at the 220? So we had areas that could stock up to 250 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare. Now, why is there still areas still at 250? Maybe explain that.
Yeah, I suppose there's in our own county here, Richard, just take water for example. There's a good chunk of it after coming in to 220 this year. There was 250, a lot of the black water catchment, and it was to do with having the data collected on the black water. So when that data became available, then it brought the limit down from 250 to 220 from the 1st of December just gone by. There is parts of the country still at 250 all the time. They are very small in area. A lot of them are actually outside of the heavier dairy areas. There's probably about 20% of County Waterford, part of the east of the county, still at 250 all the time, Richie.
Okay, perfect. Mark, have you questions there?
Yeah, there's a few questions coming in there. All right, maybe one for Pat there. I think, Pat, in your example, how many cows would the farmer have to reduce by to be under the 170 and not be in derogation? In your example.
Yeah, well, he's roughly around 60, 70 hectare dairy farm at the moment, so 135 cows. So obviously 70 round figures now, just for tonight's example, 70 cows or 70 hectares, I should say, at 165 divided by 92. So if to just for sake of an example for tonight, for the detail, he would have to reduce, if it's cows only, he can only have 125 cows on the land to stay at 165 kilos per hectare. So I suppose that's a story for a different day. The main message from tonight is that your organic nitrogen figure dictates your chemical nitrogen allowance. And as Seamus explained earlier, your chemical nitrogen allowance dictates what degree of slurry you will have to export off your milking platform. That's really where we're coming from tonight. Most of the people that are on call tonight are dairy clients, I'm going to guess, or derogation clients. So you will be meeting with your derogation planner very soon, in the next couple of months, to go through your plans and stocking for the coming year. And when I'm on it, I suppose if there are derogation clients out there who haven't yet returned their feed purchases for 2025 with the dimensions of any new tanks or new soil samples, please submit them to your local Teagasc office as soon as you can, because we need time to do the back work in derogation before we start organising one-to-one client consultations to get the derogation workload over the line.
Okay, and just following that, Pat, there's a couple of questions people querying that they've stayed out of derogation, probably a fear factor, and they've exported slurry to stay below the 170, but now they're thinking they're finding it harder to get homes to export their slurry to. What's the process? So how did they start the process of getting into derogation?
So the process of derogation is that you have to contact your local Teagasc office. Detailed derogation plan has to be prepared. We'll need all the maps of the land, your BIS maps as start-off point. The farm has to be mapped into plots less than 5 hectares. Ideally, you could have the whole farm soil sampled before you go into derogation this year. Last year's derogation deadline was the 15th of May, in line with the BIS deadline. Other years it has been the 14th of April. So the main requirement is that the details of your farmyard, slurry storage in existence, soil samples, maps, and a whole nutrient management plan, including slurry storage, has to be prepared, and that has to be submitted on an online application on Ag Food by a date as yet to be announced. And at this stage, we don't have the finer detail of the derogation terms and conditions for 2025, but obviously they will be drawn heavily from the Nitrates action plan we've just heard about.
In previous years, that was the 30th of April or 30th of March.
30th of March, but the last couple of years, 14th, and last year in particular, it went to the 15th of May.
15th of May, yeah, okay. Back to Thomas, there's a question came in about rainwater management plan. Okay, they're dedicated staff in Teagasc to do that. Also, what are the dates for farmers to do the courses?
Yeah. Okay. So on the first one, I presume you'll be able to let us know, but my understanding is there are staff in Chagas, and also from a dairy point of view, there's staff in Tirlawn available and waiting to put in the EIP applications. So regarding the training courses, they have begun. So for ourselves, we very much concentrated in the Wexford area, but as we roll out the work in the Slaney across into the Nord, the Barrow, and other parts of the country this year, so too will the detail regarding the training courses. So all I can ask you to do is keep an eye on tirlawnfarmlife.com, where the training courses will be advertised.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Thomas. Back, just Mark might have a question there as well, but just on the anaerobic digester and for can we use digestate to displace the chemical fertilizer allowance? So we would otherwise buy with organic fertilizer. Seamus, do you want to comment on that?
Look, the digestate, you need to be careful where it's coming from. If it's non-agricultural digestate, it can be heavy metals on it, so we wouldn't be suggesting using that type of product. But look, in most cases, if it comes in as a chemical nitrogen, then it's actually reducing the amount of other chemical nitrogen you're allowed in the farm. So that's not a good thing from your own point of view then either. So probably wouldn't be encouraging the digestate from an agricultural source that much.
Okay, and if there's maize ground, back to that milking platform, if there's maize ground within that 3 kilometres, is that counted as part of the milking platform?
So the milking platform can be grazed by cows during the year. So unless you're going to graze the maize with the cows, it's not part of your milking platform in that scenario, my understanding of it. So it has to be accessible at some stage of the year and also grazable with cows. Has to be fenced essentially and water available for cows.
Okay, and this is a good question now. There's 100 cows. If a farmer is milking 100 cows and on the platform, on the milking platform, but there's 50 cull cows, they're not milking on another outblock. Is it 100 or 150 cow that are used?
Yeah, again, I suppose the understanding at the minute it'll be small print that to be looked at, but it's the cow numbers in the farm. So if they're down as cows on the farm divided by the amount of hectares, that's what gives you your stocking rate on the milking platform. But in that case, Richie, I suppose look, you're moving a lot of the story off there already by having the cows in the other block of ground anyway. But it's the total amount of cows divided by the hectares on that milking platform. So the 3 kilometre.
Okay, and just the TB question comes in a lot about milking platforms, the caught for TB, the effect on stocking rate.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. It's the higher the stocking rate, the more slurry you have to move. So essentially, look, really, you're looking at either moving. If you have to move slurry, you're looking at moving 750 gallons per every acre in the milking block, 1,500 gallons for every acre in the milking block, or more than 1,525 gallons per acre in the milking block. But again, if you're heavily stocked in the milking block, you probably have other ground outside to support it. And in general, these farmers, Richie, a lot of them will be moving the slurry out there to grow crops anyway. Look, a crop of silage needs 100 kilos units of K per acre. That's over 3,000 gallons of slurry to meet that requirement. And I suppose the other thing as well with the K, I see one of the questions come in there about K in the spring. Yeah, be careful not to overdo the K in the spring. There's a lovely protected urea product there called 29014, where you're actually getting out a bit of K constantly throughout the year. And if you go with that 3.5 times during the year, it's the same as going with a bag of muriated potash in the October time. So just be careful not to overdo the K in the springtime. We're talking maybe more kind of summer and into the October time, the type of time period you'll be looking at more so.
Okay, Mark, have you any other questions there?
Yeah, there's just one there after coming in. Is liquid fertilizer considered as a way of reducing fertilizer requirements on farms for
Yeah,
Pat and Seamus, I guess?
Yeah, some farmers are using the liquid nitrogen mark and getting on exceptionally well with it and maybe get away with lower rates. So it's stretching that fertilizer allowance you have that a little bit further. And if that works, fantastic, because you're stretching the fertilizer allowance that bit further then as well. Definitely worth looking at, but you need the equipment and the storage for it. There's a little bit more setting up on it, Mark. I suppose that's the one thing I would say, first of all. But definitely for some farmers, worth looking at. And for those using it, they seem happy with it.
Okay. Okay. Back to Pat. Would a slurry bag be suitable for soiled water, or is there a grant available?
Yeah, in the recent times, slurry bags have been approved by the Department of Agriculture for TAMS. There's a separate specification called S126, and under that covers geomembrane stores, and under that slurry bags are allowed. There's also a separate spec S126A, which lists approved suppliers and installers of these slurry bags. And again, they are subject to planning permission, and they are subject to having a fence around them and a bund, which is a high clay bank of more than 2 foot all around. So if people want to look up specification S126 or specification S126A, they'll get all the details on slurry bags. Where I see them as a role, I have one client in my area who was leasing a farm fully, and that's what he installed at lower cost than other forms of slurry storage to have adequate storage on the farm. So the answer is yes, they've only been added in recent times, but they are under S126.
Okay,
And I suppose maybe just
perfect.
follow on with the slurry storage there, Richie. I suppose, look, I suppose the other thing as well is, look, if a person is spending 50,000 plus VAT on slurry storage, they'll get back the VAT because that's a fixed capital item. And look, there's 60% grant aid on slurry storage. With the department costing, it might be more like 50%. So that 50,000 becomes 25. And that 25,000 then of the last spend, that can be written off then accelerated capital allowances over 2 years then as well. So it could bring the 50,000 plus VAT expense down to about maybe 12,500 out of the farmer's own pocket at the high rate of tax. So there is helps between the VAT, the grant, and accelerated capital allowances for tax as well available.
Okay, there was a question there about financials. No, that's fine. That
Yeah.
covers that. And there's a few questions. I suppose there's a little bit of confusion, Pat, around the dairy washings, a separate storage for dairy washings, and when you mix dairy washings and slurry together. Maybe just go through that again, Pat.
Yeah, so if you build a separate tank for dairy washings, the minimum requirement is 31 days storage, which is the month of December, which is 4.4 weeks. So straight away that tank size becomes the number of cows milked in October for most spring calf herds by the 0.3 cubic meters per cow per week by 4.4 weeks. And I suppose just to define, I suppose, on the ground, really we're talking about a tank that's behind the cows in the milking parlour. If that tank is used for winter feeding or drought feeding, it will not be deemed as being soil water, it'll be deemed as being slurry. My case study, the farmer has no separate soil water tank in place, and as a result, he has to store it for the number of weeks from the 1st of October to when he dries off the cows. And in his example, it's actually 10 weeks. So that's the difference, a separate soil water tank. As what I often say to my clients too, do you want to be building a tank that you'll have to empty every X days or weeks? Why not make it big enough? Nobody yet has told me a slatted tank was too big, a bit like the bull tank. So 4.4 weeks if it's standalone and stored with slurry. It could be the full 16 weeks if you're actually milking through the full winter.
Okay, there's a lot of questions. I think we've got through most of them. We're at 9 o'clock now, so I think but just one for you, Thomas, just on what measures in the EIP and Tier Long Sustainability Action Programme are best worth focusing on to address the water challenges?
Yeah, so look, it depends, and that's not the answer you want to hear. So some of the measures are to do with nitrogen losses, and the other are to do with overland flow in terms of phosphorus. Okay, so it depends on the particular challenge on the farm. So when our agri-sustainability team come out, they'll identify is the challenge that they'll use what's called pollution impact maps, and they'll tell you is the challenge on your farm nitrates or phosphorus. And in our geography, generally the challenge is nitrates, right? So look, in that case, it's about getting the fundamentals, the nutrient management plan, the rainwater management plan, keeping your yard clean, do your training, and have the basics right. And look at the measures we've went through. All these measures, there's double funding almost available through the Farming Quadra EIP, through the Sustainability Action Payment. And it's just trying to align them and pair them off so you're getting the best value out of taking these actions. There's in summary, there's a 60 million pot there. Let's make sure as people who are committed to taking the journey and making the investment, let's make sure together that we work together to draw down as much of that to have the most significant impact. And the final ask I'd say is the application has now been made. In our case, we're saying, look, we have about 6 million of applications gone in. It's really about implementation. So maybe look, for anyone that just about hasn't started calving, are there any, because that's the way we're going to make the impact. Thanks, Richie.
Thanks, Thomas. Okay, at that, I think we have most of the questions gone through. We're gone over the hour. I'm just going to wind it up and thank everybody for attending. We had a big crowd here tonight, and thank everybody for attending. A big thanks to all the speakers, Pat and Seamus from Chagas and Thomas from Tirlawn, and thanks for Tirlawn for working with us on this webinar tonight. And a big thanks to Mark in the background that keeps the whole thing afloat in the background, the whole technology afloat. So thanks everybody, and thanks to you for attending.